Hi, in today's video, we are going to discuss about key performance indicators in Agile plan. As we all know, transforming teams, organizations, business units and all towards Agile environment is becoming mandatory and as well as inevitable nowadays. So whenever we are working on Agile planning, whenever we are creating multiple sprints as part of completing the iterations on within the given time, there is one of the challenge which normally we faces, especially called scope change. Scope change is what generally the challenge which normally we makes. Like scope change means whatever the product backlog items which are existed. Sometimes there is a possibility where we need to add and as well as remove some items and all everything into the existing one. When there is a deviation of scope, because for every sprint there will be a sprint goal which will be defined before we are going to start the work, but sometimes whenever we are working on, there are some challenges being a team we face in reference to the scrum team where we have to edit existing tasks, the user stories what we have taken, or by adding some new things or removing few things and all, which almost practically it deviates and it affects the scope of the sprint. So now in today's session, I am going to discuss about how it is impacting and what will be the average percentage of that, right? So that's how generally I'm doing it, because it impacts on the quality of the backlog grooming because of the changes what is that we make in regular intervals and all. So this will impact on the backlog grooming. At the same time, whatever the prioritization we have made in the backlog, that is also will get impacted. At the same time, this will even impacting on the coming sprint plannings, whatever we do, and capacity planning, etc. So I'll be taking some example so that you will be understood how to do the scope change, etc., etc. So for this scope change, what is that I'm taking is user story points are the user story points. User story points is what I'm taking. Story points as a measuring unit, right? So this is what I'm taking now, right? So because we have two different things, either we can take story points or else we can take a task directly and we can calculate the effort for hours, days, all that. But I'm taking story points as a measuring unit. Now I'm taking multiple sprints. For example, sprint, whatever is committed, right? Added story points, if any, followed by the scope, right? So this is what I have taken. Now, let's say, for example, normally, for example, sprint 2, right? So because sprint 1, you don't see anything because in sprint 1 is the first one. We don't see any changes in that. But whereas after that, also we do the change, right? So sprint 2 is what we have taken. Assume that we have committed 29, whereas there is no additional story points which was added. Now, when it comes to sprint 3, wherein we have 34 story points, there was no additional story points which was added. Now I am taking sprint 4, where whatever the story points were added, were committed were 16. But additional story points which are added will be 23, 24, 23. Now sprint 5 I am taking. We have 30 story points. No other additional story points were added. Next, I have taken sprint 6, where we have 45 committed, and additional sprints, whatever we have committed was 0. Next, sprint 7, where we have 30 story points. Whatever the additional story points we have added will be of 0. Now, this is what generally we call it as D-scope, right? So D-scope, nothing but the kind of removing story points or something like, right? So sometimes story points will be removed and it will be added. Added was 0 here, but whatever the removed story points in the second sprint were 10. Whereas in the second case, nothing, it was 0. Even in the third case, even there was no D-scope. D-scope means whatever we have removed, I'm saying, right? Which is also 0 even. But here, D-scope was 15, right? So 15 story points were removed from the sprint while we are working on. Now, the last one is also 0. So these are the user stories. These are the sprints which I have taken, right? So sprint, a number of sprints like second, right from second onwards I have taken. Because first sprint, no, because first sprint already started. So that is completed. Based on that, we will be doing. Because that is the parameter. Because unless until if you have not done with one sprint, we don't know that. So hence I have taken second sprint as a parameter. Second sprint, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and so on, right? So committed story points. Next, added story points. Next, we call it as next will be D-scope, like removed story points. Now, whenever we want to make a formula for this, usually whenever we are working on D-scope, right? So if you want to know about the D-scoping of this, normally we have to take D-scope once, which is called D, divided by the kind of committed ones, whatever we have, which will be multiplied with 100. Now, if we have taken, for example, if I have taken sprint 2 as an example of sprint 2 I have taken. Now, whatever the D-scope points here, that was 10 divided by. So, 10 divided by whatever is committed 29, which will be multiplied with 100. So, how much it is? Ten divided by 29 into 100, which is 34.4, right? So 30.4. 34.4 means 34.4, which is equal to 34 usually, right? So 34% is what generally the D scope for sprint 2. So this is how generally we calculate even for the remaining sprints, what we have taken on that, right? So either it can be, for example, if you have taken as sprint 5, there were nothing was added, but whatever the committed was 30 and whatever the descope was 15. So that we can take 15 divided by 13 to 100, right? So that's how generally, so that is how generally the percentage of descope we will be knowing, so that we can understand much better. Now, whenever we are talking about the scope increase, means if you want to know about the scope increase here, you want to know about scope increase, all that. Normally, the calculation, whatever will be taken as follows. A divided by C into 100. Wherein here we need to know about few things. The first one is D stands for, as you know, like removed story points. Next, A stands for added story points, and C stands for committed story points, right? So that's what it is. So now uh, I'm taking sprint 5 as an example. S5 as an example I'm taking. Yeah, I'm taking S4, sprint 4, right? So sprint 4 I'm taking. So sprint 4 in this added story points is what we have to take. Added was 23, which is divided by committed story points was 16, which will be multiplied with 100, right? So 23 divided by 16 into 100. Which will be 143.7, right? 143.7, which is equivalent to 140. I can say, right? 143.7 means which is equivalent to 1.144, right? So this is where generally the increase of scope which we can see. So the first one, whatever we have seen was about D scope, right? So because of the D scope, if there is any story points uh, which was taken out, right, removed from the existing sprint and all, what will be the percentage? Now, if you see that, if you want to know about the scope increase based on the added story points and all, so this is how generally, right? So, which will be 144, right? So this is how generally the scope change whenever we are working on agile environment. If you want to understand about the scope change for any of the projects, means for any of the sprints, whatever we are working on. So this is how generally the scopes change will be calculated. So I think you got an idea. So if you have any questions, if you have any queries, followed by any training or coaching needs in reference to the agile, all that. So please reach out to the contact details, which will be posted in below to this video. Thank you.